Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the Big East Rewind. My name is Chuck Everson. I'm your host, and my co-host, as always, is a guy that never has any bad weather around him, never a rainy day, because my main man is Sonny Spera from Syracuse University. Right, son?
All right, Chuck.
We got a little lesson yesterday.
Yeah, we got a little diction lesson. That was good.
Yeah.
Thank you for the sunshine reference. That's
sunshine,
good.
Yeah, but wherever you go, Sonny, that's the word. So we got a good show today.
We do.
We've had just about all of the coaches from the Big East at that time have been on in some way, shape, or form. With the exception of maybe one or two guys, we have another Hall of Famer. To join us today. It's going to be a lot of fun. He's got over 650 wins to his credit, Sonny. He had in his Hall of Fame career. He also won a national championship at the University of Maryland. Former Boston College head coach, and our good buddy, Coach Gary Williams, is with us. Gary, how are you?
Good, Chuck. Sonny, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I mean, this thing that we've been doing, Coach, has been a labor of love between Sonny and I, and the whole Big East thing, being able to reminisce and go back and be nostalgic about kind of the golden age of the conference has been a lot of fun for us. We've come across a lot of people. We got some history lessons from guys like Mike Tranghese, and we were able to talk with some of the guys that normally wouldn't talk with us, like the Georgetown guys. We've had about a half a dozen of those guys on. Totally different than the way they were perceived back in the 80s, Took down the curtain a little bit.
That was the old Hoya paranoia back then.
Yeah, the old Hoya paranoia. That's right. So tell us a little bit of how you got started, Coach. I mean, you came out of Jersey, right? And and then you played at Maryland, right?
Right. I grew up in a great basketball area back then, right next to Camden, New Jersey. Camden was known for their great teams in high school over the years, and plus we consider ourselves part of Philly. And the way the Big Five was back then, before the Big East, before there was much TV exposure. I mean, that was just the Palestra was Mecca. If you were a kid, you got a ticket to a basketball game, Big Five game at the Palestra. That was as good as it got. And you take the bus or then the subway to get to the Palestra. And so that's what you did growing up. So I kind of really got into basketball by about sixth grade, and was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to Maryland. Was a very low scoring guard at the University of Maryland, but I had a lot of fun. Played against Billy Cunningham in the ACC, guys like that, Jack Marin, good players in the ACC, and hung on as a graduate assistant. They called it a graduate assistant, but for me, it was to get my degree. Spend that extra time to get the degree. Then I was really lucky because the Vietnam War was going, and it was hot and heavy right then. And I got the junior varsity coaching job at Woodrow Wilson High School in Camden, New Jersey. And, I would have been in Vietnam if I did not get that job.
Wow.
Junior varsity, you started there. So from there, how long did you stay at that level?
I was JV coach 69, 70, was the varsity coach. We won the state championship. Guy named Dick Vitale was coaching in Jersey then. They were Group 1, we were Group 4. And,
so your first year as varsity coach, you won a state championship?
Yeah. I thought it was easy, Went undefeated. We were 27-0, won the state championship in New Jersey.
Just like that, man.
Yeah.
I don't know what Coach Boeheim's complaining about. It's easy. I don't know.
I know. It was not hard at all. And but then I got very fortunate. Tom Davis, who was a great coach at BC before me, Stanford, Iowa, he was just a great teacher. He was getting his doctorate when I was in Maryland my last year. We got to know each other. And he said, if he ever got a head coaching job, he'd give me a call. He'd want me to be his assistant. You know how that goes. A lot of guys say nice things, but, that wasn't going to happen. But Tom got the head job at Lafayette College in Pennsylvania, called me, and he said, I want you to be my assistant coach. And I said, I'm there, because I wanted to be a college coach, but I wasn't. Back then, you had to be part of that 5-star Garfinkel, the whole group. And I wasn't part of that. I just wasn't in that inner circle. And so I thought I was going to be a high school coach, the rest of my life. But Tom gave me the job, but he also had one little thing there. I had to be the head men's soccer coach at Lafayette
Oh, really?
because they never had a full-time assistant coach. This is 1971 now. And so for the money that was in the budget, the soccer coach had left. So I had to take his job. And I didn't know anything about soccer, which, was pretty obvious the first day of practice.
You were Ted Lasso before Ted Lasso.
Yeah, I know. They could have made the movie. And,
Wow. So Lafayette.
Yeah, I was 6 years there. I
6
went
years.
with Tom. When Tom got the BC job in 77, I went with him as an assistant coach, and I got the American U job in 78.
Right.
So from there, it was 4 years at American, 4 at BC, 3 at Ohio State, and 22 at Maryland.
22. Wow.
What did you take from being his assistant to when you got your first head job at American?
Well, he was a great teacher. I had played for a guy named Bud Milliken in college, who was strictly man-to-man. We played no zone. We didn't have much of a zone offense, really, because that he just thought that was cheating to play zone, back then. And so Tom, everything I learned about zones, I got from Tom, both offensively and defensively. And Tom believed in full court pressure. I believed in full court pressure. We had used it in high school. And so it was the right fit for me. And, it was just, you get breaks along the way. And working for Tom Davis was certainly a break that I got.
Yeah. I mean, he had his own style too. I mean, wasn't he a big flex guy, coach? Didn't he run that?
Yeah, we had run a little bit of flex in college. They called it reverse action back then, but it was the basic flex cut, was there. And so that continued my education in that. And we ran a lot of flex, when I coached. And, you get off into other things, but the flex was still our basic. We felt we could score or get fouled, toward the end of games with that. And so I had a really good education in that.
Now, when you get the job, he leaves BC. It wasn't there a little like who's going to get the job? Wasn't there a little something? I mean, you ultimately got the head job that followed Dr. Davis,
right?
But wasn't there some other Wasn't there some other people in the mix that was?
Well, I'm sure there was. Kevin Mackey was there as an assistant coach with Tom. After I left, he was the head coach at Don Bosco, came in there. And he did not get the job. He went to Cleveland State after my first year.
Yep.
And they had a good run in the NCAA tournament. They beat Indiana, in fact, was their big win in the NCAA tournament. And he's with the Indiana Pacers now, still with the Indiana Pacers. But, I had an advantage. I knew the AD very well, Bill Flynn. He was a tough old hockey player, at BC. And, he just, I think he believed in me. And Tom Davis gave me the push. And so I got the job.
What was it like starting out at Boston College? What were some of your thoughts? Like, what did you want to do?
I was in American U. We didn't have a gym. We played at Fort Myer military base right outside of DC. So we had no home court, you pack up the vans and put everything. So I get the job at BC, and you guys remember BC's Robert Center.
Robert Center,
about 3,500, tartan floor, all that.
Brutal place to play.
Yeah, people say, what a horrible place. And I said, hey, it's a gym. I didn't have a gym where I was before. And so that was, a great place. And like you said, it was a great home court. I mean, nobody liked to play there. And that's one of the things Dave Gavitt did when he got the Big East started the role. He said, hey, you guys are not playing at Robert Center anymore. So we got to play our games in Boston Garden, which wasn't too shabby. That was okay, but it wasn't on campus. And I know Villanova moved some games. Seton Hall had to get out of their place. Yep. Georgetown had to get out of their place. And it was great for the league, to move into back then modern places.
Yeah, UConn too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. UConn had to do that.
Yeah.
What was it like, Coach, with, when you first got into the Big East as far as being a head coach? You had all of these charismatic guys. You had Boeheim and Massimino and Thompson and Louis and PJ at that time. What was it like with those coaches meetings and stuff going on? What kind of action was going on behind the doors there with those meetings?
The coaches meetings were spectacular. You could have made movies, TV series off of them, because back then, and these guys became really good friends, Jim Boeheim and John Thompson, but they definitely didn't like each other for my first couple of years. My first coaches meeting, we used to have in the East Coast Conference, which I was in, we'd have our coaches meeting at the Philadelphia Marriott on City Line Avenue in Philadelphia. That was our league meeting. My first league meeting in the Big East, Dave Gavitt said, let's go to Bermuda. So we had our coaches meeting in Bermuda. So I was all fired up for that. And that was great. But go into the coaches meeting, the actual coaches meeting, Dave Gavitt sitting there, and Boeheim and Thompson get into it. And it's just spectacular what they were saying. It was unbelievable. Joe Mulaney was sitting there, and they were talking about ball deals at the one point. And Joe Mulaney, the coach of Providence before Pitino came in there, turns around and looks at everybody and goes, "I mean, you guys have ball deals?" Like that. But that was Joe. He was a great guy, and he had coached the Lakers and stuff like that. And that was the thing about, you get the Big East job. Okay, here we go, our first league game. You look down, there's John Thompson, there's Rolly Massimino, there's Boeheim, there's PJ Carlissimo. Then Pitino comes into the league, and like your coach, every game was like there was no bottom of the league. There just was. My 4 years are 82 to 86. I guarantee you, the last two teams in the Big East could have played with anybody in the country.
I got to ask you a question, because we had PJ on, and PJ shared some, we'll call it inside information. He said that he and you were the two young coaches, and at these meetings you kind of sat back, but he referred to you in a nickname. And I got to ask you, are you familiar with the nickname? And if you do,
Wacko. That's what.
Where'd it come from?
Boeheim and him started that.
Boeheim started it. Oh, PJ didn't say that.
Hey, Boeheim. By the way, Boeheim's older than me. I guess if I had sons that were good, I'd still be coaching too. So, but anyway, Dave would organize a golf trip, and Tranghese was on there. We had John Havlicek one year. It was great, but it was always Jim Boeheim, Mike Tranghese, Dave Gavitt, myself, and PJ. For sure. And then we get to have two forces. We get to go with 8 guys, and we get over there, and like PJ and Boeheim, they say they were friends, but if you just walked up to them and just watched, you say they hated each other, because they had nicknames for each other, which I can't say on a podcast. We just had a great time. It was like 5-6 days away from everything, away from all the battles. And that was the great thing about back then. You could, for the 2 hours you played, you probably hated each other. It was like a war in the Big East back then. But as soon as it was over, you were friends. There was no need, to let it carry over or anything. And I think that's what happened. The friendship that I had with PJ and Jim Boeheim and people like that, and even Rolly and I, got very close as time went on. And by the way, speaking of Rolly, he had camp up there in the main line. First of all, he had every Big East official working at his basketball camp in summertime, and he was paying them, so you might get a call or two during the winter. And then secondly, he'd take you out to play golf. Okay. Then he'd take you to his house, and his wife would cook pasta. And then he'd say, see you, and you were gone. And then you remember on the way back that he didn't pay you. He just didn't pay you. He stiffed you. Rolly just stiffed you. He was that was Rolly. He goes, and then he deny everything. We used to call him Louie, like on Taxi. Remember Taxi?
Oh yeah, Louie DePalma.
Yeah, Louie. Yeah, that's what we used to call him, and that was Rolly's nickname. Yeah.
It seems to be a common thread, Chuck, that in these golf outings, nobody paid.
Yeah. Nobody paid, right?
No, hey, PJ would press everything, and he'd lose like $1,000, and like you never saw any of that money. I mean, it was never going to happen. You knew it. You knew it while you were playing. He wasn't going to pay.
So you mentioned the closeness of the coaching of the coaches and stuff, and we found as we're doing this, there was really a brotherhood with players on. It doesn't matter what team you're on. We all kind of went through the same thing. We just wore different colored jerseys. If Boston College was on, we were rooting hard for you guys against if you were out of the conference. Same with Georgetown, St. John's, etc. I think in talking to the folks that we've talked to, I think Dave Gavitt really perpetuated that by some of the things he did with you guys. What was some of the things that he did? He was kind of ahead of his time with some of that stuff, with making people kind of get along, even though you might not have been one of these guys that might have gotten along with a certain, coach, Louis, for example, or whatever. How did he do that?
He was great with that. A couple things he did that I remember, like at the league meetings when he would have a dinner, he would always, seat you at a table. If you had a problem during the year with the coach, he made sure you sat with that coach, and you could iron out whatever the difficulty was. And like he took the media day to Madison Square Garden. Obviously, taking the Big East tournament to Madison Square Garden was just incredible. And to be able to do that, I think it was within 3 years of the league being started up. It's just incredible that you could get into the Garden, and that became the biggest thing in New York City while I was there. I got out in '86 out of the Big East, but while I was there, that ticket was such a hot ticket with Wall Street and everything that was going on in New York City. It was just incredible. So Dave would do all those things on media day. He made sure that, if you were picked sixth in the league and you weren't picked, top four, so all the media was going to go to the top teams. He made sure the media stopped at your table, too, and just to make sure that you felt, that you were getting your fair share. And, Dave, you could always call Dave. Dave would take calls at his house. He might answer like, "What do you want to bitch about now?" or something like that. But he'd always take calls, and he was the greatest. And the combination of Dave Gavitt and Mike Tranghese was just incredible. And Dave used to get an idea, and he'd tell Mike, "Hey, Mike, we can do that, right? Get that done. We can do that." That was Dave. Dave had great vision. I mean, just to take advantage of ESPN coming on the air as the Big East is being formed was just a genius stroke, because, cable back then, people forget, cable back then, that was like, third world. That was nothing to be on cable. And all of a sudden, ESPN comes along, and we're coast to coast, and every kid in the country wanted to watch ESPN because the Big East was on there. And it was, and obviously Patrick Ewing and Chris Mullin and guys like that had a lot to do with the appeal to high school kids. But it was just wild. And like I said before, there was just no easy games. There was no week during the Big East season where you thought, well, we're playing at home, we probably got this game. That never happened.
You're our first Boston College Eagle. Are we right, Chuck?
Yes, that's correct.
So I got to ask you about some of your players. One of my good high school buddy, Mike Sinicki, played for you for 4 years.
Oh yeah.
But you had those, you had those guards, because I'm a point guard. So I'm gonna let Chuck talk about Jay Murphy and Martin Clark in a minute. But let me talk about Michael Adams and John Bagley. Those two guys were just so tough in their own way. Talk about just coaching those guys and getting.
Yeah, I didn't coach Bagley. He left when Tom Davis left. He went early into the draft.
So
but I got to know John. He came back. Yeah. He was a great guy. He played in the NBA 10 years.
Great
and
player.
if you look at a guy more unlikely not to be an NBA player, it was John Bagley, because he was short. He had no muscle. It was just kind of like a straight down from the shoulders with John. And but what a great player he was. And Michael Adams, he got kind of lost in the mix. But I'll tell you what, if he was playing today with the where he can't hand check as much on the perimeter and things like that, he played in the NBA 11 years, and he was on the NBA All-Star team 1 year. And he was just so quick, and being short, he could dribble as fast as he could run, and he could really run. And that's what made him so tough. And he was a good enough shooter. You couldn't lay off of him. And he was really great. But every once in a while, he'd drive you nuts. And in practice, some days he'd come down on a fast break, and he'd throw the ball off the glass, go up and get it and lay it in. And that really upset me, but he thought it was funny. But he was great to coach. He's down here in D.C. now. He coached with me for a couple of years. And I think he was with Mark Schmidt at St. Bonaventure for 1 year. Mark Schmidt also played for me his senior year at Boston College, the coach at St. Bonaventure.
I think Michael Adams was ahead of his time with that running floater. I mean, they didn't
call he had the floater. Well, he told, had that. You know how that goes. When you get a guy that can shoot, even though it looks funny, you don't mess with it. and he shot his jump shot almost like a floater.
He did right here.
And yeah, and
Right
the
off his
reason
shoulder.
I said, "What do you shoot like that for?" And he said he was like, I think he was like 5'10" and a half when he played at BC, but like say in ninth grade when he was like 5'6" or whatever. He said he wanted to play against older players. And the only way he could get a shot off was to throw that ball straight up instead of out like most guys shoot the basketball. So he was just, Michael was the other thing that was really underrated about Michael was how smart he was. I mean, you think about Pearl Washington, the great guards at Villanova,
Right.
People you had Mark Jackson at St. John's, people you played against.
Yep.
Michael he'd go to toe-to-toe intellectually with any of those guards. I mean, he was just very good, great at running the offense, great at, on the fast break, making the right play. And he was just one of those players that refused to lose. He was tough. Got in a fight with Patrick Ewing one time.
Yeah, I remember that.
Not that we had a lot of fights in the Big East back then.
No,
There was no fights.
And the guys on Georgetown said there was an incident like
Yeah.
they didn't call them fights.
They just brushed it right off, Coach.
There
Just
were
like a little
incidents.
incident.
Yeah, it just happened. That's the other thing. I called Boeheim on this one. I got a call from Dave Gavitt, and he says, "Hey, you guys got to quit fighting. That's got to stop. It's hurting our league, the image of the league, blah blah blah. All that stuff." I called Boeheim and I said, "Jim, were you in a fight?" And he goes, "Yeah, we had a fight. We had a fight with Georgetown." Then I called Rowley at Villanova, and he said, "Were you in a fight?" He says, "Yeah, we were in a fight with Georgetown." Like that, they were the fights. It wasn't
Right.
like Syracuse and BC fighting. It's the way it was back then.
Yeah, you're not kidding. We had a difficult time trying to guard Jay Murphy. He always
Yeah.
gave us a tough
He
time.
was a tough cover, man.
Yeah,
Well, he was
tough
6'10", first of all, and he was a left-handed.
Left-handed.
And he knew he wasn't quick, but he knew how to get open. And we ran out of bounds plays for Jay, trying to get him to the corner to get open where he could, take that shot. And
yeah.
he was incredible. And he played in Europe for a long time. And I always thought he was an NBA player. But the other guy we had, which was really good, was John Garris inside too.
Yeah.
John was really quick.
Yep.
We played Ralph Sampson of Virginia in the NCAA tournament in '83, and we lost 95-92 to Sampson in Virginia. And that's the year NC State beat Virginia the next game to go to the Final Four, which Jim Valvano and NC State won. And Ralph Sampson couldn't guard John Garris. He got 3 fouls in the first half. They took him out. And second half, they came back and got us. But John Garris was a great player. John Garris did not like basketball. It was incredible. Here's a guy, 6'8", 6'9", really quick, good touch, all those things. So I get the job at BC in the spring of '82. So you call each player in, trying to get to know him, talk to him. And I talked to John, and I said, "John, now I want you to, really get on the weights this summer. I want you to work really hard and do all this." And he puts his hands up nicely, and he says, "Coach, just so you know," he says, "I'm not a big basketball guy." He said, I really don't like to do all those things, but I'll be ready to play when the season starts. So now it's September. We're back in school, and the Boston Celtics used to come over and play against our guys before they went to camp to try to get in a little bit of shape. And John Garris rides his bike into Roberts Center there through the back, back in the day, you could do that stuff. And he rode his bike in there, and he got out on the floor against like Larry Bird, Parrish, McHale, people like that.
Yeah,
and like he belonged, he could play. He hadn't touched the ball for 3 months. Believe me, he hadn't touched the ball for 3 months, and he gets out there and he can play. And it was just, he was an amazing talent. He really was. And I always thought if he wanted to, he could have been he could have been a good NBA player, not just been an NBA player.
There was another guy too I want you to talk about. He was kind of undersized. He played down low. Roger McCready.
He was great.
Yeah, I loved his game. I mean, he got the most out of what God gave him.
He was 6'5", and he had some bulk to him, but he was just, and he didn't think he was anything but a center. That's why he was so good. Most guys 6'5", they want to go out nowadays. Out past the 3-point line. But
now
Roger
most guys
knew
7 foot want to go out there on the 3-point line.
Oh yeah. Roger could catch the ball inside and score, and we needed that with our team. the 85 team, Roger was a junior and Michael Adams was a senior. And we were able to, get to the, in fact, that's the year the Big East had the 3 in the Final Four.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up. Yep.
We lost in Memphis on a last-second shot by Andre Turner. I'll never forget it. And Memphis then beat Oklahoma the next day to be the 4th team in the Final Four. And we felt we could have played with Oklahoma. I'm not saying we would have won, but we could have played. It could have been 4 Big East teams in the Final Four that year very easily.
What did you think? Like, you brought it up. Talk about, what do you think how you would have matched up with Oklahoma?
Well, they had Tisdale. Tisdale was their big player.
Tisdale was unreal. Yeah.
But, and he was really good. But we were good then. We had beaten Texas Tech and Duke to get there in that. And so we were rolling pretty good. We didn't have a great regular season, but good enough to get in the NCAA. And, once you get confidence, Villanova did the same thing.
Right.
I think your last game against Pittsburgh, you lost by like 25 regular season games or something at Pitt. And all of a sudden, 4 weeks later, you're national champions. And you get rolling in that NCAA tournament, then you got a shot. And that's what we were. And I thought, we could beat Memphis, but we turned the ball over on an out-of-bounds sideline play.
Yeah.
And they picked it up. And, Memphis had 4 NBA players on that team. They had Andre Turner played for a long time. Askew played for a long time. Baskerville Holmes and the big guy,
Keith Lee.
Who I'm blanking on.
Keith Lee.
Yeah. I mean, that was their team. They were a great team.
Yeah. Those were great days at that particular time. I mean, we thought for sure, we got 3. It's never been done before or since in the Final Four. I mean, that was something.
Think about that. I mean, and it's not like a 15-team league like it is nowadays.
Right.
That's the other part of that. So,
right.
It was incredible.
Yeah. And the league was 5 years old.
Yeah. I guess what? 88 it started? Maybe
84, national champion 84. So, the meteoric rise.
2 national championships in the league in the first 6 years. That's pretty good.
How about that?
Yeah, it worked out pretty well. I mean, at that particular point, I mean, there was no real discussions on, the top. If you named the top, if you want to call the ACC was another one that was a really good league. Maybe the ACC and the Big East might have been the top 2 teams, leagues back then, I would think,
Coach, who were some of the toughest opponents that you, let's talk about coaches first. Who were some of the toughest guys you had to prepare against?
Well, in the Big East, there was no easy out. Each guy was different. If you played Boeheim, you're going to get to 2-3. But Jimmy was, I heard him speak at a clinic. I was speaking at the clinic along with him, and I hear him speak, and he'd go 2-3, and he'd draw 2 guys in the front and 3 guys in the back, and that was just 2-3. And he was doing all kind of matching up. He'd double team in the corner, especially after out of bounds plays or things like that. And he was doing a lot with the 2-3. And plus, you think about Pearl Washington, being able to run the point for Syracuse. I mean, he was incredible. In fact, and you'll love this, Sonny, on the court now with Pearl's number on there. Yeah. You know why that number's on there? Because they were playing BC. We missed a free throw. Yep. And Pearl got the rebound and went down and shot it from there at half court. Yep. And as the ball's in the air, and I saw the tape, Pearl Washington was running to the locker room like he knew it was in.
He was gone. It's the fastest I've ever seen.
But there's another part of that story. And by now, Boeheim and I are pretty good friends, right? So, you're just devastated. And so the first thing you do, you turn, I got to go down and shake Boeheim's hand now. Turn around. And Boeheim's like a foot away from me. Like he knew it was going in too. It was like, what was that? And it was just an incredible, but you had games like that all the time. I mean, and then you play St. John's. All they had was Chris Mullin, Bill Wennington, Mark Jackson, Willie Glass, go right down the line of great players playing for them.
Yeah, Goodwin or Russell, one of them.
And Syracuse is, I tell Boeheim all the time, I said, you should have won all these games. You've had the best players in the country. Wendell Alexis, nobody even talks about Wendell Alexis.
Yeah, how good he was. Yeah.
Oh man, was he good? And got guys like that. They were just there. And it was incredible. Of course, Georgetown, first thing you do, you're going to go against Georgetown. Their defense was probably as good as any college defense that you could go against during that time, because they had Ewing in the back and he was like a goalie, anything that came in there, he was going to try to disrupt it. He was very physical, and he would bang around and, but Billy Martin,
a lot of guys,
Billy Martin was a great player. Reggie Williams was a great player at Georgetown. And, Villanova, you had all your guys, I always thought Villanova played as well as a team. And I'm not saying that just because you're on there, Chuck, but Rolly always had whoever was on the court for him. You guys played and it wasn't like you had the best players. It was like you guys probably played the best together. And I've always thought that was Rolly, as a coach. And by the way, Rolly should be in the Hall of Fame. I mean, that is a sin that he is not
talking about that today.
That's just incredible.
Yeah, that was a tough one. I mean, they did some Billy Raftery's son Billy did a documentary called The Maestro. Yeah, and they actually had the call that he got when he didn't get in. It was kind of a little bit crushing for all of us, to see that.
Oh, I never understood that, because Rolly won a national championship. He played in a great league, coached in a great league, and that usually gets you there if you did that.
Yep, tough one. But we got Jay. Jay's in there now, so.
Jay's obviously done a terrific job, and I think he's got that thing. I compare that to Duke. After once Krzyzewski got going, it just kind of perpetuates itself, and I think Jay's in that situation now, and they're always going to be good. It's just the way it is. And I'll tell you another thing that's really smart about Jay. He could have been the Sixers head coach, I'm sure, maybe a couple times, and he decided to stay. And I think he's had a happy life because of that, that he hasn't moved around like a lot of coaches did, like I did, which is really disruptive.
How is that like with you just mentioned, like moving around all the time? How was that on your family, and how was that?
It was tough. I went through a divorce during that time. Mm-hmm. And the thing was, I was in American U, and 4 years there at BC calls, you're going to take that job. While I was coaching at BC, they treated me really well, except it was a Jesuit school and they expected me to take a vow of poverty too. So when Ohio State was willing to double my salary, it was tough to turn down. And that was a great job. The Ohio State job was a great job. I probably would have never left there unless it was Maryland, where I'd gone to school and played. They had gone through the Len Bias thing, and Lefty had gotten fired over that. And then Bob Wade came in, it didn't work out. And so I went back to to Maryland, and it probably wasn't a great move, but I did it. And so, you just try to make the best out of it. But we had signed Jimmy Jackson at Ohio State in November, and I out of high school, and I left in May, and they went to they missed a jump shot to go to the Final Four against the Fab Five, Michigan, 2 years later. And I just felt we could have once in Ohio's different than the East Coast in that once you get a player from that state, you own the state. In other words, everybody wants to go to Ohio State anyway because of the football thing. And, we could have really sustained that for a long time. I really believe that. But, I made a decision and came back to Maryland, and, it went okay. So it worked out.
Yeah, national champion. I mean, they went okay, just not like they did in high school.
Yeah.
Not bad. Now, was that a dream location for you, being that you played there? Was that something that you'd always aspired to be at?
It's one of those things. When I left, as I said before, I left to be a JV high school coach. So you never think you're coming back and coaching an ACC school in Maryland, things like that. It was just the opportunity. I felt like I was, I was still young then. I felt like I was doing something for the school and, giving back because they were good to me. They gave me a scholarship, got a chance to play.
Now, what was it like? What was it like for you, in the aftermath of what happened with Lenny, coming in? You mentioned Coach Drizel and Coach Wade. What was that like, trying to rebuild that whole culture?
I wish I would have known what it would be like, because it was like everybody was like, Bias was so big. I mean, they still do a documentary on him on the anniversary of his death, and that's 97. And it's just, you had the faculty, they felt that basketball really had hurt the university, the rating of the school and all those things. You lost a lot of fans during that period. And in recruiting, how recruiting, as you guys know, anything goes, coaches will recruit negatively against you, and you walk into a kid's home. And back then, the home visits were the big deal, and there'd be stacks of, the copies of the articles in the Washington Post about the drug situation and all that stuff. And, so it was very difficult. And that probably was the toughest 3 years I had as a head coach, my first 3 years at Maryland.
Now you had it. Yeah, I mean, you obviously had to do an overhaul on your whole the whole culture there. I mean, how did you go about taking on that monumental task?
I did have a great player, Walt Williams, who once you go, and because of the situation before me, we had sanctions against us. We couldn't play on live TV for 2 years. Couldn't play in the NCAA tournament for 2 years, and. But we had a player named Walt Williams who went on to a very good pro career. He played 10 years in the league, and Walt stayed. And you could go anywhere you wanted to and be eligible right away back then if your school went on, had sanctions against them.
Right. Yep.
And so Walt was local. He's from Temple Hills, Maryland, and he wanted his parents to get a chance to see him play. And so he stayed. And we were like Walt Williams and 4 other guys. And he still has the record in the ACC. He went over 30 points in 7 straight league games, which nobody does. I mean, it was just an incredible performance. And Walt could play 4 positions. He played point guard at 6'8", some for us. He did a lot of things for us. And one of the great people. He does radio now for the University of Maryland basketball. That was as tough a situation. But, you put yourself into situations. There was nobody to blame. It's just the way it was. And, you never, it's the old story. You take a job, you never really know the job till you get there. And it was just tough because the faculty, as I said, they were upset. And, obviously Baltimore was upset. Bob Wade was a legend in Baltimore, a very good football player, had coached at Dunbar High School, Reggie Williams, all those guys out of Dunbar. And, it was just, you didn't have a lot of friends. That was how you felt. You just felt like you're on your own. Because you weren't getting much help from the school. I'll be honest about that back then, because they didn't know how to handle it either. They were shook, obviously.
Yeah, you don't expect your star athlete, never mind basketball player, but your star athlete to, for have that tragedy to happen to him.
Well,
like that,
in the whole, like the 2-day event where you're the second pick in the draft, you sign a big contract with Reebok, and then you come back and you die that night. I mean, it was just. And everybody liked Len Bias. Len Bias was very well liked on campus. That was the other thing. He was like their best friend. He's one of those guys where like 100 people think he's their best friend. Yeah. And, for him to just not be there all of a sudden, it was very difficult.
Yeah, it was tough. It was, for the whole, especially if you were a basketball player around that time too. Like we were. Len was my class, and we got to play against him 3 or 4 times at Villanova. One being in the playoffs, but that year he kicked the hell out of us at the Cole Fieldhouse. And then a couple of weeks later, or months later, we were battling him in the NCAA tournament. We wound up holding him to 8 points, which helped us get to the end. But man, he was something else. That really incredible. Yeah. But let's jump ahead, Coach, a little bit to the your 2 Final Fours that you went to in 2001 and then the national championship in 2002. The win in 2002 was the first time a team won the national championship without any McDonald's All-Americans on the team. That's pretty impressive, because all these guys, they recruit all these kids from the McDonald's game. They wind up playing in these big tournaments and stuff, and to have you could do that without any kind of 5-star guys, that's pretty impressive. Talk about that for a second.
Well, the thing was back then, as you guys know, you could develop players. And so when we recruited, you're in a league with Duke and Carolina. So if you're recruiting a kid from California, say, they're going to look at Duke and Carolina, and they might, after looking at those two schools, if they don't want to go there. And well, I looked at the ACC, and every school in the ACC went through that. When we won in 2002, we were the first ACC team out of the state of North Carolina to win an NCAA championship. And so you never quite got that player that maybe was the great player in the league that year, or, like a Leitner or Grant Hill, people like that back then. And so what I tried to do was get guys that I thought were very coachable, that were good. Don't get me wrong, they were very talented, but they might not have been a McDonald's All-American, but you know how it goes. But by the time those guys are juniors and seniors, they're as good as any McDonald's All-American coming out of, high school. And so we could play, and we were really deep. We had a great backcourt, and Steve Blake, who played in the NBA for 13 years, and Juan Dixon, who played 7 in the NBA. And up front, we had Chris Wilcox, who was a lottery pick, and we had Lonnie Baxter, who played in the NBA for 16 years. And then behind them, we had great size. We had 6'10" Taj Holden from New Jersey coming off the bench, and a guy named Ryan Randall, who was a junior college player out of Texas, 6'7", 250. So we didn't have to worry about foul problems inside that year. We could bang with anybody, and we got good as the season went on. We became a very good basketball team.
How would you say, Coach, when all the lessons that you learned as a young head coach in the Big East, prepping for all of the stars that we talked about already, how did that prepare you for life in the ACC and all the guys that you had to play in that conference? And how would you compare the two conferences as a whole from your time in the 80s to your time?
Well, those two conferences had the best talent. The Big Ten was good. It was physical. All those teams had a lot of really good basketball players. But, the stars were in the Big East and the ACC during the time I coached. And what I learned was that you just could not be intimidated. And hopefully as a coach, that got through to your players, that it didn't matter if that guy was rated higher than you. There was still a way we could win this game, that type of thing. And I'm sure you heard all that from Rolly Massimino during your time with Rolly.
Right.
And you got to be that way. You got to have that attitude that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I used to tell our guys, you guys, you mean to tell me that there's only 20 really good players? There's 20 players that are better than everybody else in the country. I said, that's a bunch of crap. There's no way that's true. So we can be as good as anybody else. And that was kind of our mantra as we went through. And having coached in the Big East, I was not intimidated by any coach we had to play against, whether it was, Bobby Knight or Gene Cady, guys like that in the Big Ten, or, Krzyzewski, Dean Smith, Roy Williams. It didn't matter. You were ready to play because you went against great coaches when you coached in the Big East.
Coach, you had that intensity on the sideline, like hard to duplicate. And I see it now. I just remember, just you typically kneeling and just so dialed in. Talk about, if you can remember, what were some of your greatest competitive moments in the Big East times?
Well, my first year there, you know how that goes. You don't know what to expect. You don't know if you're good enough. There's a lot of what ifs when you're in your first year in a new conference. And we went 12-4 and tied for first place. Villanova was one of the teams we tied with for first place. And we beat St. John's twice that year with Chris Mullen, one at Alumni Arena and back at BC. Then they beat us to win the conference tournament championship. But just, the idea that that really gave me a lot of confidence for the rest of my coaching career. In other words, we had played some good teams in American U. We had some success there. But to get into a league like the Big East, and I think it was the best league in the country that year, it just was good for me because not that, I didn't think I could coach, but it kind of like cemented the idea that maybe I can go against whoever I have to go against. And that was big for me.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you the next question. I got to ask you about it. When you were elected to the Hall of Fame, talk about how you felt. Was it something that you were like out of left field? Or just describe the emotions of it, because I know this is the first time I think I ever saw Coach Boeheim really soften.
Yeah, I hope you got that on tape. But it's like
it is. It's on the podcast. It's live.
Yeah. But it was like, you think, well, I might have a chance. You think you have a chance. I retired at age 67, and probably could have coached a few more years, but I coached a certain way, and I'd rather get out a year or two early than a year or two late, tell you the truth. And so that's what I did. So it was 2011. I retired, and the phone rings. They tell you you're nominated. You're one of the guys nominated for the Hall of Fame. And I said, "Wow, that's incredible." And I said, just to get nominated, that's unbelievable. And then the call comes. And it's amazing because it's going to be thumbs up or thumbs down. There's no in between with that thing. And they said I'll never forget. It was Thursday. We'll call at 12 noon. 12 noon, the phone rings. I'm not 1 minute after 12. So I'm thinking they're going to call the guys who didn't get in first. So like I got no shot. And now you said you were in, and congratulations. And I said thanks.
Wow.
I mean, that was just incredible. And, it's I've heard some people say, well, that justifies, yourself as a coach, but really, when you coach a long time, I've coached 43 years, counting the high school years. And, there's so many good things that outweigh any negative things that happen to you as a coach. And all those players, the assistant coaches, guys like that you were in the trenches with, that really is what builds how you feel about yourself. At least in my situation, I can only speak for myself. But the Hall of Fame was really a great thing.
Does your, at that point when you get the call, does your basketball life flash before your eyes? You kind of get visions of all the stuff playing for your high school coach, and then what you learned and took from him, and when you went to high school, coached in high school and in Lafayette and so on.
Yeah, I mean,
think about all that.
Right? I don't get to college. Yeah, it's probably true without my high school coach, because my parents were divorced. I didn't care about school. I just wanted to play basketball. College was the next place to play basketball. And so my high school coach says, well, you got to get grades to get into college. And he said, this is what you got to do. So, yeah. And he pushed me. He kicked my butt, if I missed class or anything like that. So a guy like him, Tom Davis, if Tom Davis doesn't make the call to me to come to Lafayette, I'm probably never a college coach, right. Just things like that. And, Dave Gavitt, who for a lot of coaches had a lot to do with their success. The Big East was really good for a lot of coaches over the years. And, Mike Tranghese, people like that. And so all those things come into play. And I think, and you think about them, but it's more like after everything's done and things settle down, you're driving down the road one day and you think of one thing that happened to you during your career, which is, pretty rewarding. It really is.
Yeah, that's cool. That's good. So what are you doing now, Coach? You're an analyst out with the Big Ten. You still doing that?
But I wasn't good at that. I was, they wanted you to be funny, to point out coaches' mistakes. And I just didn't feel comfortable. I did it for a year, and Big Ten that's unbelievable, that network, what they did for the Big Ten, and the finances involved with that with schools is just incredible. And there are great people out there, but it just wasn't me. So I do some work for Maryland in fundraising once in a while, and some technical stuff, some advice, but other than that, I'm trying to play golf, but the golf balls I buy now don't go as far as they used to. So it's kind of tough.
Yeah, I know about that.
I play the same ones.
If you ran into a guy that's a young coach, and he's just starting out, and he asks you for advice, what advice would you give somebody who's just starting out in the business to be a head coach?
I do two things. I say, don't try to imitate anybody, whatever your personality is. And I kind of got that from Jim Valvano. I knew Jim when he was at Bucknell and I was at Lafayette, and he was Jim Valvano at Bucknell. Nobody knew about it back then, but he was the same way. And so that, and then whatever the best in basketball, whether it's your man offense, your zone offense, your defense, that's what you teach. Don't try to teach stuff that you're not real comfortable with just because you saw it at a clinic or another coach was successful with it. In other words, you do a better teaching job with the material the best. And I got that from Tom Davis, without a doubt. He was so basic, it was incredible. It was like almost boring at practice because, bounce passes all over the place. Tom would have zone offense around the perimeter, bounce passes. How about that one? And like that was Tom. And BC was good because they executed all that stuff. And the thing I said, don't ever underestimate execution to your team. In other words, no matter how good your talent is, you still have to execute, because a team will come along that's not as good as you, but they execute really well and they'll beat you. And that's what I'd tell a young coach.
Well, I think that's a good way to wrap it up, Coach. Thank you so very much for joining Sonny and I tonight.
That was great,
Coach,
on the show. I hope you had a good time. We had a blast talking to you, reminiscing about your career and especially your time with the Big East. We appreciate you coming out.
No, it was fun. And thanks, Sonny and Chuck. Thank you. And Chuck, you look like you could still play. Maybe.
That's because I'm sitting down, Coach. That's because I'm sitting down. So you've been listening to the Big East Rewind with Chuck Everson and Sonny Spera. The Big East Rewind has been produced and directed by Nick Chico Chorus and Daryl Gurney. Don't forget to check us out on YouTube. Please hit like, subscribe, and share with your friends. We appreciate you all checking us out. Thanks a lot for joining us. Have a great night.